And what do you do for Joe there?
Right now I'm doing social media and website stuff, and I'm one of the 3 Sunday school teachers for our discipleship Sunday school class.
Joe's a good guy. I got to know him. Well, actually, I had Joe in one of these classes, but it was face to face, several years ago now.
Yeah.
And grew to appreciate him quite a lot.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Miracle, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this Sunday, he and Steve Sands are going to be talking about their testimonies and their they both just had their sobriety anniversaries.
I saw that on Facebook. Was it Joe 25 years or something?
Yep. 25 and 15 for Steve. So they're gonna share about their journeys.
Mike, your camera's sideways. Your mic's off. Your mic's still off. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to, okay, we'll see if that will stay.
Is it your phone?
Yeah, I have to do this so I can use my PC and go back and forth of what you're doing.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jan. Evening, Jim.
Hello, hello.
Jonathan said he was going to be late.
Oh, he did? Oh, that's right. Okay. That's a fine looking guy there, Jen.
He's good looking. That's Wyatt.
Is that the oldest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, his birthday's Monday.
And how old will he be?
He'll be 7.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Wyatt,
he's a pie baby.
Yeah. Hey,
Can
Wyatt,
you say
come on.
hi?
Take your seat and watch your stuff. Love you, buddy. I mean it.
Thanks, babe.
Okay, who else is missing? There's Jacoby. Bethany. Evening, Minister Campbell.
Good evening. Good evening. I have a quick question.
So we haven't started class yet. You can't have a question yet.
Oh, okay. I'll wait.
What's your question?
So the assignment was to write an intro into the sermon, any sermon that we've already covered in modern day English. I may have done it wrong, so I need clarity. I just took section 1 of a message and rewrote it. Is that right?
As long as it's one of Wesley's.
Okay, good. Okay, because I thought we were supposed to write an intro story. I went through several levels of what this might have meant.
No, it's purely basically, and I may not have explained it well enough, Jacoby. It's basically the idea was for you to take that sermon, the content of that sermon, and write an intro that you would write if you were preaching that material. Not that you would preach it that way, but if you were preaching the basic content of that, how would you do it?
Gotcha. Thank you. That did it right then. Good. Whew.
Okay, that's fine. Does anybody know enough about how to do these things that I can? Hang on a minute. Oh, there you go. That worked. I had Bethany hidden behind me, down in the corner. I could see the top of her head. Now I feel better. 2, 4, 6, 7. Who's missing?
Jonathan.
And who else? Are there 9 of you?
You're missing Sephora too.
Oh, yes, Sephora. I'm sure she'll jump in. Okay, we'll get rolling. Overall, I think you guys are mostly doing pretty well getting your assignments in. Few of you have been late on some few things, and some few things still hanging out there. But I'm not sweating it a whole lot. As much as possible, though, I want you to turn them in. I want it all to be done by the last class. I can fudge a little bit, but James does not like to go more than a few days after the class. Do the best you can with it. I know you guys all have schedules, and I remember those kind of things. You just, I think most of you doing the best you can do with the hand you've got. So, and some of you doing quite well with it. So, okay, this week we're looking at Wesley's second part of the way of salvation, and primarily it's focusing on Christian perfection, which that or perfect love was, of course, his preferred terminology. Because the actual term entire sanctification is not in Scripture. The one thing that I'll just highlight in the introduction is in the sermon Justification by Faith, that Wesley had a broad understanding of salvation that included sanctification. That salvation was the whole big umbrella of coming to the right relationship with God, with justification and all that under it. But the main point was that he felt like when someone comes to faith, that in justification, that this is something God has done through Christ to justify us. And then in sanctification, it's what happens in us by the work of the Holy Spirit. And we'll get into more of that later. But before we do that, one of the assignments was an essay on what does it mean to be saved. Evening, Sephora. What does it mean to be saved? Jacoby, you got any lights you can turn on? Buddy, you're dark enough without being in the dark.
You and Jacoby need to be reconciled.
We're reconciled. Seriously, all I can see your teeth. Turn the light on.
Oh, you're talking to me? I'm sorry, I froze for a second.
Yeah, you got any light you in a closet or what you doing?
No. There it is.
Let there be light.
There is light.
My brother is here. Okay. What I want to do is I want a few of you, preferably, and you don't have to read it word for word, but I would like a few of you to briefly relate what you wrote about what it means to be saved.
I'll jump in there.
And then the others are going to share your testimony of being saved and sanctified, but you can abbreviate it. You don't have to, read it like you turned it in. Okay, Jim, go ahead. What does it mean to be saved?
Yeah, so I was saved at 14, and I wrote, while I remember that moment in time, my salvation continues to live in me and is part of my daily Christ-centered walk. My salvation happened, but it's something that I believe as a Christian goes with me.
Okay.
In
What
longevity.
is salvation? What is it? What does it mean specifically, though, to be saved?
To be set apart, to be transformed.
Okay. Any more than that? Okay, I'm not a Christian, and you're telling me what it means to be saved.
Yeah, it's a change of heart, of mind, of everything that we do, following Christ. And I guess I need to rewrite my paper because I didn't put that in there.
Yeah, the idea behind this is your understanding, if you had to tell somebody, what does it mean to be saved? Those of us that grew up in the church, we know. But,
yeah. Okay. So, and I quoted a guy named Kevin Watson that had looked at one of Wesley's sermons, and I found what he said very well. It says, salvation by faith is trust and confidence in the work of Jesus Christ to forgive us, reconcile us to God, and enable our growth in righteousness and true holiness. And that, like what I said, that goes with us daily. It's not
right.
just that one moment in time back when I was 14.
Okay. Yeah, you don't need to rewrite it. That's good.
Okay.
Someone else, what would you say? Somebody says, what does it mean to be saved? What are you going to tell them?
To be
I would-
saved first.
Go ahead, Sephora.
Yes, to be saved first, we have to confess that we receive Christ in our life. And then when you said you be saved, it's like you are free from the penalty of death because you receive Christ in your life now. It's like you receive the finished work of Jesus Christ in our life, and then you experience the new birth, like you have a new life with Christ.
All right. Bethany, what were you going to say? Was it you going to talk, Bethany?
I was.
Okay.
So I would explain to my kids that God created us to be like him in his image, and sin separated us from that. And so for us to fix that relationship, Jesus had to come and die. And when we are saved, we are saying that we believe and we are trusting that Jesus is who he says he is and that we can follow his example.
Okay. One more, baby.
I said at the moment of being saved, we are justified, our sins are forgiven, and our guilt of our sin is taken away. We're regenerated, which means we're born again, and we're a totally new creation in Jesus. We're adopted into God's family, and also a co-heir with Jesus. We're part of a family, which is God's family. We're redeemed, which is we're liberated. It also is we have a new purpose to love God with all of our being and our neighbors ourselves. We're reconciled with God. This is the alienation. We're reconciled. If you have a broken relationship with a family member or neighbor, and you become reconciled, it's back to the friendship that existed before your disagreement occurred.
Okay. Mike, I think you checked all the boxes. Good. That it is a whole big, it is more than just a forgiveness of sins.
Alan, I wish I'd known this or had been taught this. I've thought about this a long time. The question and the response. And it's like, man, I wish I'd known all of this like years ago, And it's not, in my opinion, it's not taught now. I haven't heard this taught in one package. What does it mean to be saved? And is what I mean.
Yeah, most of what we give people is the thing of forgiveness of sins, and now you're right with God.
Yeah.
Now that's okay for an elementary understanding, but for people in you guys' shoes, you need to at least have more of that in mind when you're teaching people and preaching and so forth. Okay, some of you now I don't want your life story here of how grandma took you to church when you were 3 and all that kind of stuff, but I do want you to the other assignment was to write on your own personal testimony of being saved and sanctified. So who wants to launch out first on that one? Because the other ones of you are going to have to that didn't on this one.
I don't mind starting.
Okay.
I
want to ask you, Jen, though, are you sure you are saved?
I am sure. I'm to the altar a lot.
I'm just kidding. Okay. What would you say, Jen?
Well, I was saved when I was a little girl, but I don't ever remember there being a time when I didn't know who Jesus was. Like Jesus was always a part of my life, always a part of my story, a part of my family. And so to a degree, it's like I've always known him. But there was a point in my little life of what I could understand that I was a sinner and needed to be saved. And that looked different for me as a little girl, but yet it was real. It was a real experience. And my daddy prayed with me, and I accepted Jesus, and I felt different. And my life was different, even though it wasn't that different, if that makes sense.
But in effect, it was very different.
But it was very different. My future was different. And so I always followed Christ. I knew that I wanted to always do good and to be in the Bible and to learn more about Jesus and to help people. And so when I came to Trevecca, I wasn't a part of the Nazarene church, but I came to Trevecca and I started learning about Jesus in not a very different way, but in just a way that seemed to grasp me, hold on to me a little bit more. It seemed to fit better my understanding of who God was. I was from hellfire and brimstone, and I really gravitated more towards a God of love and of grace. And there have been several moments in my life, like I remember there being a point where I'm like, oh, I'm all in. And that's where I would say would be kind of like a sanctification initial experience. And I may be, I'm still early in some of this theological stuff, so I may say it wrong. But there were like moments along the way when I realized, oh, Jesus was calling me to something even deeper. It was like a deeper understanding. And then maybe a year later, it was almost like there was even more of a deeper understanding of just leaning in more into the love of Christ, into the grace of him, and what he was asking me to do.
Okay.
So
that works.
Okay.
That works. All right, somebody else. What would you say?
I'll follow that.
Okay, Amy.
Because my story is very similar to Jen's story. And I feel like we've talked about this in another class, like one of Darren's classes or something. But I also grew up like from before I have memory, just like knowing that I love Jesus, because my mom became a Christian when I was like 2 or 3, and she was so passionate about it that everything she learned, she shared with me. And it didn't matter that I was only 2 or 3 years old. She shared everything that she was learning with me. And so I grew up and like doing Bible studies with my mom at the dining room table. And like by the time I was 8, I was trying to evangelize a bunch of bullies on the next street over who threatened to beat me up. And I was baptized. I made the decision to be baptized, and I don't even remember what church it was, when I was 8 years old. So like I know that there was a moment of decision, just like you said, Jen. But like I don't remember like a moment of conversion necessarily, because like I always grew up like just knowing that I love Jesus. And then as an adult, I experienced what I would call a dark night of the soul, back in like 2004, where like I didn't necessarily fall away from Christ at all, because I still had my faith, but I went through a period of like deep depression, while my parents were going through their divorce process, and my marriage was rocky for a while. And I was on a trial of antidepressants and ended up having suicidal thoughts, and I was like, this is not me. And my husband and I started attending a new church, and we talked with the pastor and his wife, and we all prayed. And from that moment on, it was like my all-in moment. It was like, this is it, we're serious, like, and I didn't realize at the time that there's no theological basis for multiple baptisms, but I was baptized in the Church of the Nazarene in 2004. And I really feel like that is like my sanctification moment. That period of time is when like everything took a turn at that point. And then there were several points, just like you said, Jen, too, where like there were deepening moments where like God asked me, give up more or like go deeper. And I, like one of those I think was in like 2008 or 9 when God asked me if I would be willing to give up my writing if he asked me to. And that was hard. And there was a lot of gut-wrenching crying on the floor, but I said yes, and God gave me back my writing. And then in like 2017 when I finally answered my calling after 10-12 years of God trying to nudge me in that direction. So like I keep seeing these deepening moments along the way as well.
I think in the life of I think what you and Jen both are describing, these moments, I think in the life of a sanctified person, if you want to call it a sanctified person, Wynkoop has trouble with that. But those that have come to the point of of understanding God can correct that predisposition to do what you want to do. I think what we find in that is when those things come along and God points out things in our lives, we find ourselves very willing to do that. He brings us to a point, and the person that has come to those places and God has done that work in them, they may be, are you sure it's me? Have you dialed the wrong number? Something like that. But I think the response is when we really know that he's asking something of us in the life of someone who has come to this place of the right kind of love relationship with him, the response is always, yes, I will. Because I think it's the very thing that a person who has experienced that wants is whatever God wants. Okay, who else needs to give me a testimony here? Dylan, you're elected.
Yep. So I actually have a completely different story than both of them. From earliest memory, my dad left my mom when I was maybe about 2 years old. My mom raised me by herself. Fast forward till I was about 9 or 10. She met my current stepfather. He used to attend the church that I still attend now. We went back there, and even through that, like a giant time period, probably like 9 to 15, 9 to 16, I was at church, but I wasn't mentally there. I wasn't wanting to be there because I didn't care. But the one thing that was my moment of being saved was I was at my real father's house, and there was just a moment of I could not stand being away from the church and being away from the people and feeling like I was so far away from everybody, and just also feeling like I needed some kind of connection. And so that night I prayed that whatever God wanted for me, that I could hear him and that I would do it. So that was the moment that I got saved. I got baptized 2 months later. And that summer at our annual church camp every single year, it was a Tuesday night, and that's when I felt my call to ministry.
Okay. Jacoby, what would you say, how would you share your salvation, sanctification experience with somebody?
There I was in service. They brought the snakes out. I didn't get bit, and realized then that God had something different for my life. 20 people walked in that service, and only I walked out. No.
Well, what about the strychnine? Did you drink it?
One sip. I didn't like the smell of it. No, but hold on one second. Ladies, I'm unmuted, okay? Okay, so like my story. So I was raised in the church brat. Mom was church board secretary, choir director, blah blah blah. And so I functioned as the church being an obligation. I fell asleep in service one day, and the pastor was preaching on Lazarus. I was sleeping on the pew next to the aisle. The pastor walked down the aisle and while I was sleeping and picked me up over his head and yelled, Lazarus, Lazarus, get up, Lazarus. And I cried my eyes out because that was like a worst way to wake somebody up. And at that moment, I realized that I was not saved. This is a true story. And like, I literally went to the altar and prayed and gave my life to God because I felt like what happened in that moment wasn't happenstance, because the Elder Glassberg, my pastor at the time, would tell you that he doesn't remember the whole process of doing that. And so that was the only wake-up call I felt like God could give me. Hey, ladies, quiet. And so maybe like a month later, I kept getting phone calls from my friends that it was weird, different friends. One girl I was trying to sleep with, one guy who was her boyfriend, and then another guy who was a friend of mine, all called me at separate times. Was like, why are you hiding from God behind things that he created? And I go, what? This is a weird thing that for you three, not knowing how I know each other, to say at the same time. And so I felt really weird about that. And then on Sunday in that service, the pastor literally said that you cannot hide from God behind things that he created. He wants all of you. And I go, wow, that's oddly specific. And so I went to the altar and I said, well, God, I feel like I've given you my life already. And then what I felt like God said was, no, I want your future. I want your motivation. And it was very specific in that prayer what God wanted. And so, and he told me, he said, you give me these things, I'll show you your wife. And then he showed me my wife, like maybe 6 weeks later. It's a crazy situation. And I married her, and we're still married. And that's how I feel about that.
I've never known of anyone to get saved from a Lazarus story like that. That's a new one for me, buddy. That's a new one.
Well, Elder Glasper will be at my ordination story section, ordination. Like, legitimately, I will make sure he tells you that story, like authenticate it for you.
You don't need to. I believe you. I just want to meet the nut that went down and picked the kid up and held him over his head in the middle of a service. In our congregations, they'd throw you out if you did that. Okay, let's go on to the body of the lesson here on Christian perfection. The one thing I will highlight is that from Wesley's, from the people who you can read there who have influenced Wesley, is where he came to believe that God had the power to enable us to live a holy life, and that he had a big time. He was really optimistic that our transformation could be more radical than what other people had previously preached, and that it could really be an actual transformation, and not just doing the rituals of the church and through the rituals we're saved and all those kind of things. So it's very critical, as I've mentioned several times, in Wesley's understanding of salvation, sanctification, that God can absolutely change someone, transform a life, and bring them to the place of what he
I thought
again, grace is not irresistible. What's that?
You froze up, good brother.
I did.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we didn't hear all of what you said.
Oh, goodness. It's probably, am I okay now? I've got a Wi-Fi problem here that I've got to pay some money to get somebody to fix it. But bottom line of it was that Wesley really believed that that someone could be radically transformed if they would cooperate and respond positively to the grace that God would offer them. Not that he would just forgive, but that he could transform them. So that's most of. Now if by you being Wesleyan, since you're going to be ordained people or deacon, any of you going the deacon route? Okay. While I'm thinking about it, some of you may want to be prepared because some of the guys in these committees are coming down pretty seriously on if you're called to preach, you need to be an elder. If you're not called to preach, you need to be a deacon. Of course, there are different ways to preach and all those kind of things. Some of you preach by your teaching and all that, but just some of you be prepared. Some people may ask you that in the ministry things. Of course, Mike's on a different track with the lay ministry certification. Is it license or certification, Mike? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's certification.
Yeah. Okay. Knowing that Wesley believed that, and that's what we teach. How does that inform how you work with people, how you approach people, your mindset, so forth, what you can tell them, and so forth? Anybody?
I've never used it. I don't recall using the word perfection because I've said this before. I was so biased by it growing up, and the theology I grew up under was that sanctification equals perfection. And I watched my dad live it out, and it wasn't true. So I don't use the perfection term.
It's okay.
I focus on becoming more like Jesus on a daily basis, having the mind of Christ. Who has known the mind of the Lord? We have the mind of Christ. Let the same mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. So I really try to focus my teaching on, don't conform to the culture of this world, but allow God to transform you by the changing of your mind, transforming of your mind. So I focus on that, just as often as I can.
Yeah, and I'm not concerned so much that anybody uses the term perfection, because it can send up, some really crazy thoughts. But the main emphasis here would be that God can do what Mike's talking about. How else would some of you guys approach this, or how would it inform your ministry? That you really believe that if people cooperate with the grace of God, that he can transform them into what he has in mind for them.
I use Adrian Dunning's for Christian perfection, his example of the 2 chairs. I don't know if he did that a lot, but what he did when I was being mentored by him was he brought out 2 chairs. One chair was nice, super nice looking chair. One chair was beat up and raggedy. And what he said was, which chair is perfect? And, being that I figured it was a trick question, I chose the raggedy chair. And so he goes, try to sit in the beautiful chair. You sat in it and the arm fell off. Some other things fell off the chair. It broke down. The ugly chair, you could sit in it. Wasn't the most comfortable chair, but it could sit in there. And he said, this chair is perfect because it's accomplishing that which it was made to do. This is the same perfection that God has instilled in us. He's making us to be able to do exactly what we're created to do.
Yeah. That goes to the Greek word teleos, goal or completion or maturity thing. Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'll piggyback off of what Jacoby was saying.
Okay, Bethany.
That especially with the children that I teach, I'm often the first opportunity that they get to experience that initial salvation and even get to meet Jesus and understand who he is. And so this idea of the Christian perfection down at the bottom of 11:4, Christians are never made incapable of sin, but sin is no longer need to rule in their heart. And just helping them to understand that they get saved and are, inviting Jesus and trusting in him, that he's the one that can help them make decisions with regards to how they act at school, how they act at home, and can see a transformation and a change in their lives, because they're no longer, they aren't doing it for themselves, they're doing it for Jesus.
Okay. Just above where Bethany just referenced on 11:4, the second paragraph that starts in one view. I'm going to read through that, and what I want to do when I get through with it is what part of that particularly stands out to you as being really significant that you would need to make sure people understand. Okay, it doesn't have to be done the way Wesley would say it. This comes from his plain account of Christian perfection. In one view, Christian perfection he was talking about is purity of intentions, dedicating all the life to Christ, to God. It is the giving God all your heart, our heart. It is one desire and design ruling all our tempers, emotions, thoughts, so forth. It is the devoting not a part, but all of our soul, body, and substance to God. In another view, it is all the mind which was in Christ, enabling us to walk as Christ walked. It is the circumcision of the heart from all filthiness, all inward as well as outward pollution. It is a renewal of the heart in the whole image of God, the full likeness of him that created it. And yet another, it is the loving God with all our heart and our neighbor as ourselves. Okay. Number one, let me say this. If you're trying to explain what Wesley meant by Christian perfection, give them that paragraph or rewrite it to where they can understand it. What part of that paragraph communicates, you think, most clearly to the Christians that you work with? Or what part do they need to hear? Jim?
I think the first part about dedicating the life to God in all our heart, because that really says where our focus is supposed to be.
Okay. Anyone else?
I like purity of intentions.
Why so, Mike?
Well, in my first response, it is what it is. It's having, being intentional with no other purpose, no other target, but dedicating my life to God.
Yeah, I pushed you a little bit at that point. It is very clear, purity of intentions, because people, that way people can understand, okay, I'm really intending to do all God wants me to do. Yeah. I really want to be everything he wants me to be, even in those times when I really make a bad judgment or I'm just not at my best or whatever. There are those times when you're glad God knows your heart, Yeah. Anything else stand out to anybody in particular?
It is the devoting not a part, but all our soul, body, and substance to God. I think that's a key because we have people who are okay with devoting a part of themselves. But when God asks for all of you, it can get harder to be willing to do that,
Yeah, and I hope to bring up part of that in Winecoop's reading if we get to it later, because Winecoop's understanding of Wesley is there's no such thing as partial commitment, at least a known partial commitment. One of the parts that has stood out to me from the first time I read it, I think, is the one desire and design. One desire, one design, God, what he wants, those things. Back down to what Bethany brought up a minute ago, where she talked about that Christian perfection and sin stated that Christians are never made incapable of sin, but their sins no longer need to rule in the heart of believers. The newborn Christians are perfect in sense that they need not commit outward sin. Why is that important in the Church of the Nazarene to discipleship training, teaching, preaching?
I grew up in the Nazarene church and did not have a clear understanding of what this concept of entire sanctification, Christian perfection was. I was always under the impression that it was you didn't sin anymore. And so this concept of it's not that we're not made incapable of sin, but that it doesn't rule in our lives. It's giving the focus not on sin, but on living for God. And when we've done that wholeheartedly, we find it easier to not sin to the place where we just don't give it control anymore. And it's just to me, it was a freeing idea of, so this is what you mean when I give my whole self to God, is that it's like, I don't let sin have control anymore.
Yeah, and the other factor that's very important for us to understand that I've mentioned, I think previously, is even a newborn Christian needs to understand that they do not need to commit deliberate rebellion against God. That it's possible not to shake their fist in God's face and go against him. People will say, you know, after all, we all of us sin. Well, if you're going to use the broad Calvinistic definite Greek word of sin, meaning missing the mark of the divine ideal, yes, we do. But if you're using the term that Wesley liked to use, the Greek term had to do with that of deliberate rebellion, deliberately breaking a law.
Alan, let me ask you.
Yeah.
Then this is what I've struggled with this week. So 1 John 1:8, if we claim we have no sin, we're only fooling ourselves, not living in the truth. In Romans 7, Paul says, I keep doing the things I should not do. And that whole struggle, you know, that he writes about in Romans 7. So based on what you just said, I'm trying to reconcile all of this with these.
Actually, Mike, there are some scholars that, and I don't know where I come down with it, that say in Romans 7, Paul's not talking about the life once he's saved. He's talking about the life before he became saved. But then most of our people say, no, he's talking about the struggle prior to sanctification.
Okay.
Actually, let me make this real clear. There's several words in the New Testament, as I understand it. I'm not a Greek scholar, but I do know this. There are two words in the New Testament that are translated sin. One is a breaking of a law. That's what Wesley called sin, properly so called. It's that deliberate rebellion, intentionally going against what you know to be the will of God. Another Greek word for sin, which Wesley termed improperly so called, or we like to call them mistakes, but still in the New Testament they're translated sin, is any missing of the mark. Any failure to live up to the divine ideal, which we're all guilty of that. We may not feed the poor as we should. We may have a bad attitude one morning because we're tired, or somebody cut us off in traffic, and we may not talk about their mother, but our attitude towards them is not the way Jesus would really want us to be. That's the sin of missing the mark of the divine ideal or the divine perfect will of God. You brought up 1 John 1:8. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin.
Yes.
Sin there is not Wesley's definition of sin. Sin there is the term for any missing of the mark, missing the divine ideal.
Okay.
So anytime we fail to have the right attitude or something like that, and we're not deliberately rebelling against God, we can confess that to God. Okay, I missed it here. I didn't do it the way I should have. I want to do better, which we've all done that. it's important for us to understand that in Wesley's understanding, when he talks about sin, other than inbred sin, inherited sin, he is always talking about the willful disobedience of a known will of God, breaking of the known law. And so it's just important that our people understand that, and Wesley would say, even in those mistakes, the atonement covers that, because it's still not the perfection that God wants to be his will, that bad attitude. So it's important for us, back to this thing on this page 11.4, that people need to know that they do not need to deliberately go against the will of God, that Christ on the cross defeated the power of sin, that they do not have to go against what they know to be God's will. And next page gets into to that very thing of Wesley's definition of holiness, is that love is love that excludes sin from the Christian life, meaning that deliberate sin. Let's slip down there to occurrence. How does sanctification happen? Again, he underscores the importance of the therapeutic aspect, that it's a spiritual healing. It's beginning the process of healing us from the broken or distorted image of God that we were made to be, and that it's correcting that. Initial sanctification, third paragraph down, makes clear that the imparted righteousness of Christ begins to take effect in the new believer. Okay, now later we see over in Wynkoop that she says Wesley believed in imputed and imparted, meaning initially righteousness is granted to us, but that as Christ works in us, there's that actual change that takes place, making us like Christ, making us righteous. And the main point there is that even in the initial sanctification, a real change begins to take place in the life of somebody. It's not that God just forgives, but he begins then to make us righteous people. He starts that process of growth into being Christ-like. Comments or thoughts?
I guess I don't understand how this was something that he wrote way back then, and we still had the whole swing of salvation gets the tree and sanctification removes the stump of sin in our lives.
It basically, Jacoby, it basically goes to the whole difference of understanding of sin. You've seen several times in Wynkoop and a few times here in our class lecture where the idea of sin being a substance, a thing that we have wrong with us. When you embrace the idea that sin is a thing or a substance, you end up, the only thing you can end up with is this thing of sin being rooted out, being ripped up by the roots. Because if it's a thing, it's got to be cast off. Wesley, and I think he's correct, and people far smarter than I am agree, that Wesley had it right with sin being a moral term. It's a relational term. Sin is that rebellion against God, that attitude of I don't need God. I'm going to be God myself. I'm not going to be in that right relationship with him. So if we keep it on that relational level, and that we are marred individuals, that the image of God in us has been damaged or distorted, then you can see where Wesley's idea of correcting that disposition, correcting that distorted image, blah, 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 comes into play, making us like we were intended to be. Any other thoughts on? Yeah, Mike.
So in Genesis 4, God is talking to Cain. And he says, sin is lurking at your door and desires to control you, but you must master it. So in that context, what is sin? Is that?
I think there, Mike, it's just, you know how sometimes you use language just to describe something that's not intended to be necessarily a theological statement there? I think he's talking about this rebellion, this attitude to go against something is present. Almost like it's a temptation, the invitation is there, would be my first reading on that.
Well, yeah, because Cain is progressing from bitterness to anger to hatred to murderous thoughts.
Yeah. So I think that's just a way of describing the way his progression is going.
Okay.
That's my best guess. Somebody described for me Wesley's understanding of growth in grace.
It's like being mature as a Christian.
Like being matured, you say, Sephora?
Yeah. Yes, as a Christian.
Yeah, it's the growing as a Christian. Yeah. What else would you tell some? When does it take place? Somebody, according to Dr. LeCurk.
It takes place
after the initial sanctification.
Yes, takes place after we're initially sanctified, after we initially come to Christ. There's that growth in grace that will bring us to a point of entire sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
Between the new birth and entire sanctification is the way Diane LeClerc writes this. Let's see. Okay, let's look at this idea of instantaneous. Last full paragraph on 11:5. Right in the middle, it says, he, meaning Wesley, stresses that the gradual work of sanctification must both precede and follow the experience of justification. Okay? He emphasizes that it is miscible. In other words, it's capable of being lost. Justification is capable of being lost, not like you lose a dollar bill, but lost meaning you walk away from the relationship. So you are no longer justified with God because you have decided not to be right with him. Okay? He also tackles the question of instantaneousness by making his classical metaphorical statement that a person may be dying for some time, but that inevitably a moment of death does occur. Okay, this would line up with the idea and the position of the Church of the Nazarene that there is an instantaneous or a point in time when we actually die, or when God has completed the work in us. Doesn't mean there's not growth after that, but that there's this gradual growing in Christ likeness, and that there has to be a point somewhere out there. I don't know where you would say it's a second or a week or a month, but it's a completed thing where God has completed in us, making us Christ-like. Often you will hear, some of you have heard, people use the aorist tense of the Greek to prove that it's an instantaneous moment. I mean, it's just a dot in time. Best Greek scholar, one of the best Greek scholars I ever knew, said it's not so much a completed dot in time as it is a completed action. It is completed. It can be done. Again, there can be more growth, there can be more, but the part of us being what God wants us to be and him doing in us what he wants to do, basically, as we talked last week, Mike, about that predisposition, where that predisposition is finally corrected to where, okay, I'm predisposed now for, if I know God's will, not only am I going to do it, which I have to do if I'm saved, but I really want to do it. I really want to line up with what it looks like to love God. And there's no competition for that love in me. That pure heart means there's no other rivalries for love. There's nothing mixed in there with the love of God that pollutes it. Attitudes, desires, or whatever. Now, if I'm preaching all of this won't pass some of the board questions. I'll just tell you. But if I'm preaching it to old Joe in the pew, I'm telling Joe, stay surrendered to God. Stay open to his will. And keep asking him to make you more and more like Christ Jesus. And I'm just dumb enough to think that if a person goes to God with that attitude, God's going to do what he wants to do in the life of that person.
And that's what Greathouse said. He said our growth
And it's
continues. It continues until glorification, until we're there in the presence of Christ.
Yeah. And I've been through a lot of theology classes, books, and all that, and you guys have and will. But the guy in the pew, and I'm not saying don't preach our doctrine, but I'm saying make our doctrine realistic to the point that God will bring a surrendered person to the point he wants to bring them to. And we just keep seeking to be Christ-like. And if they're not interested in that, they're probably not interested in being a Christian anyway. Did I say that out loud? No. All right, let's look over on page 11.6. There's some summary statements. I want you to, I'm not going to read those. I want you just to glance through them. You should have already read them. But as you read through them right quick, I want to see which of those for you are particularly important. In other words, if you had to zero in on one and you said, for me, this is particularly important for me to understand, for me to teach, so forth, or are any of those a new understanding for you? These are all summary statements about Wesley's Christian perfection, okay? So read through those, and then first, some of you tell me what you think particularly important for you to know, communicate, or anything of that new understanding about Christian perfection.
Number 6. The
Is
Christian
which,
life.
Mike?
Pardon me?
Is number 6 a new understanding or particularly important for you?
Well,
both.
The Christian life does not have to remain a life of continual struggle, which for so many people it is. I mean, I just can't. People, hopefully we'll get into this later about Wynkoop using the words in Christ. In my 40 years of teaching, 90% of people do not have a clue what that means.
The being in Christ?
Yeah, so they don't. I mean, they're victims instead of victorious. It's a struggle, it's constant struggle. So for me, that's like in red, dark red print.
Okay. Someone else?
The continual struggle that you just talked about goes hand in hand with the love for neighbor identified in number 1. We talked about this last night in Bible study, and one of the ladies, she's a tenured Christian, if you will. She said that's one of her biggest struggles. Someone that hurts her, it's hard for her to love them. And I mean, she's in her 70s, and she said, I try, but she said that is hard to get away from, especially when they hurt me or they hurt my family. And that's a real statement. That's one of those tough ones to talk to people about loving your neighbor. And it's hard to put away those hurts when that happens.
It might be interesting, Jim, to find out what she means by loving your neighbor. If she has the idea that means she wants to go up and just hug them every time she sees them, I don't know that that's what he's talking about. But if it has to do with acting for the well-being of another person, or treating that person as Christ would treat them. That's my best understanding of New Testament love. You know, you smack my grandson, I'm probably not going to hug you. Fact of the matter is, if God doesn't get a hold of me, it's my sanctification is going to be severely tried. I mean, it just will. But how would Christ respond?
Right.
You know, he might tell them, "Don't you dare touch my grandson again."
Yeah.
And if they're hungry, he'd go ahead and feed them.
Right.
But he might not want to take them out to O'Charlie's that night.
Well, and I think that's true, because in the temple, he was upset at what they were doing because they were robbing from the poor, basically. And that upset him.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a thing of, do we understand love as this Hollywood kind of love where we just all get together and hug each other, and the fact that you killed my dog or cursed at my grandson, it's okay because it doesn't matter to me anyway because I love Jesus. No, it's how do I look at you as Jesus would look at you? Do I love you from the standpoint of you're a broken person and God can help you be better? Do I tell you don't touch my grandson again? I probably do. But if you're hungry or you need something, I think Christ would feed them. Okay, which one of those other summary statements may stand out to somebody?
I have number 4 highlighted. Holiness or perfect love is synergistic. It is lived out in a dynamic relationship with God, who provides the grace we need to be holy as we cooperate with such grace. Right now, our church is having a really big focus on discipleship, which is being Christ-like, learning how to be Christ-like, walking as Jesus walked. And I think that that's a really important one, just the focus on how do we every day make those decisions that lead us into a deeper Christ-likeness.
Okay, Jen, what were you going to say?
I was going to highlight the same exact one, and I specifically am drawn to synergistic and dynamic relationship. And I really think to me, relationship is everything. And so to have that with God, to be like totally vibing or being attuned to each other is just a really beautiful picture.
Okay. Anything? Yeah, Bethany, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really like the first one of love for God and neighbor is descriptive and normative of the Christian life. It's really easy to explain that to kids. It's really easy for them to understand you love God with all of who you are, and you love your neighbor as yourself. And it's very tangible for them. It's something that they can see and they can experience and they can learn to live out.
Let me make a comment about number 2. Wesley, it came to equate into our sanctification with a level of Christian maturity, and was cautious about claiming it too soon. I don't think we hear so much of this now, but when I was a young fella, and I'm sure Mike heard this too. Mike, your camera's pointing at the light, buddy. I can't see your smiling face.
I'm trying to get it on the charger, and I'm having difficulty.
Oh, okay.
So.
It was almost like there was pressure upon preachers to try to get people to claim into our sanctification. It's almost like a name it and claim it thing. And where people probably had not progressed in their understanding of that yet. And I think and not that someone can't be entirely sanctified early in their Christian walk. Wesley would say they could, but probably a person needs to be kind of careful in at least in us pushing people to claim that. We can teach it, we can preach it, we can talk about this ongoing love for God, commitment, letting him do in us what he wants. But I just believe in his time he'll bring them to that, and we don't need to feel the pressure to count scalps. You know, I even remember, and it may still be on the preacher's report. I don't know. It used to be on the report of how many got sanctified.
It still is. It definitely still is. I get
And
excited to this day.
yeah, and it's like, I think my last preacher's report, I put something about, how do I know? Because there is no way to know that. You might know how many came up and told you that, which is fine, but that is not an indication of how many actually, experienced that. And I don't, how much we need to push that. I mean, I believe we preach it, but as far as reporting it to where everybody says, well, I got my entire sanctification badge. I'm just not ready to go there. Sorry.
So why is that question still on there?
I think, Mike, it's for the very reason that we believe in it, and we need to be preaching it, and we want people to be able to testify to it.
But I mean, back to what you said, how do you know, and why are we asking that question? I just don't get why that question would be on there, because we really don't know how many.
Well, I think it goes back to the old time I think it goes back to the thinking that we ought to somehow be able to identify that people are there.
Okay.
And I'm just guessing.
Okay.
Really at the end of the day, we don't know how many in our church are really serving Jesus.
Thank you for saying that. I was about to say that. Thank you.
I mean, we really don't. We may know how many claim that they were saved at some point, but if we're going to take the real biblical understanding of being a follower of Jesus Christ, I've had board members that weren't doing that. They may be going to church, they may give their tithe, they may have come to a point of asking God to forgive them of their sin, but this ongoing following the will of God and living surrendered to his will, that was not present in their lives. And so, sometimes I think, and this really doesn't go to the class, but sometimes we end up preaching to people about being, about what it looks like to be a follower of Christ, and we need to go out and reach the lost, and we need to love our neighbor and all that. And we got people sitting right there that can't tell you they're willing to do what God wants them to do. And if they're not willing to do what God wants them to do, they're not a follower. It's just that simple. Now, how can we determine all that? It's hard. It's impossible, really, at times. Other times, when you see a pattern of life where a person consistently goes against what they know to be the will of God, it's pretty clear. And so we just try to stay faithful and let the Holy Spirit work on them. It's about the best we can do. Okay, let's look at some of your sermon introductions.
I'm sorry.
Let's look at some of the sermon introductions that y'all had for homework.
All right.
And we won't do everybody, but if some of you have one that you'll want to share with us. Basically, the idea here was to just take one of Wesley's sermons, the basic content of it. If you were going to deliver that theme, that topic, what would you say to introduce it?
So I did John Wesley's sermon 85 on working out your own salvation. And my introduction is this. Hold on, let me find where my introduction is. Hold on. Yeah. So work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God. Okay, that's the scripture. For it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Philippians 2:12-13. That's the scripture. So my intro is this. The moral good of God is known in some length in the heart of the whole world, including the lost. God has told us in his word, found in Micah 6:8, the Lord has shown you what is good. He has told you what he requires of you. God has placed that in each of us, in our preset birth through the grasp of original sin. Grace trumps the sin yet again. Everyone operates under the order of some Lord and some God and some strong man, as written in Jeremiah 17:5. And I get the scripture. And well, here's what I say. I just did what he did with modern words. So I don't know if I did it right.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I used that scripture where it says, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. The strong man of your heart will be shown in your actions and in your perception, like a sign or words, tablets on your heart, forehead, and wrists."
Okay. So someone else, some of you who don't preach, you may not want to do this, but if you do, that's fine. Anybody else want to share an introduction if you were preaching this sermon?
I chose original sin.
Okay, what would you say introducing the sermon, Mike?
My opening question is, why is the world in such a mess? Our original parents, Adam and Eve, were made in the image and likeness of God. They decided to declare their independence from God, and their decision is sin or a deliberate and intentional breaking of God's law. That original sin or depravity is the corruption of the nature of all the offspring of Adam and Eve. We're extremely far from being right with God. We do not have spiritual life or are inclined to evil. Sin has consequences. As a result of Adam and Eve's sin, the earth was cursed, and the dominion of the earth was transferred from Adam and Eve to Satan.
Very good. Jim, you're a preacher. What's your intro?
I did not do the assignment yet. I apologize.
Okay, well, you can turn it in. We'll ask for one more. Somebody else want to share your introduction? Sephora, do you preach?
Not often. It's like once a year.
Oh, okay. But someone else, would you want to share your introduction? Amy, do they ever let you preach?
I have not yet, just because I have no idea what I'm doing with that. And I did the assignment, but I did it wrong. So
I would, well, don't redo it. Don't redo it.
I did it. You know how Jacoby asked if it was like to introduce the sermon or to rewrite the beginning? I introduced the sermon.
It's okay. No, it's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
Either one's fine. Yeah. Basically,
Okay.
the idea was if you were preaching that, how would you introduce it?
Okay.
Okay, that's good. I know a lot of you don't preach a lot, and that's okay. The main thing is in an introduction to do what an introduction does. Give them a glimpse at what's coming up, the basic content of it, get their attention, and go from there. Just for your information, this doesn't have anything to do with class either. They say nowadays that if you don't get a person's attention in the first 30 to 60 seconds, they're gone.
And that's why I use that opening question. Why is it?
I agree.
Yeah.
I was gonna add too, because I do online stuff. I've heard from some podcasters that it's actually 10 seconds for online stuff.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Yeah, especially because like people just click off and go somewhere else.
Yeah, our media world has made it kind of difficult for communicating, for preaching, and to where we think we have to entertain. But the truth is, we have to do something to keep attention. Now, let me share this: the longer a person is in ministry at a church, they're granted credibility. And a weaker preacher will have a good audience if they've been the pastor of that church quite a while and have been a good pastor to the people. They will grant them listening that they may not grant someone else, even a better preacher, because they've earned it, so to speak. Okay, let's go on to the next lesson. We're going to double back because the first chapter of Wine Coop, of course, that we're looking at tonight is on Christian perfection. but I want to make sure we get through this lesson because I can always double back on Wine Coop later. Welcome, Jonathan.
Here.
Okay, looking at the means of grace. Basically, means of grace for Wesley had to do with those things that channel grace, that distribute grace to us, which, you know, there are a lot of them. He called, and he even specifically used the term channel of grace. I did a master's paper on at Olivet on John Wesley's view of the Lord's Supper. Well, let's just say it was before, well, it was at least before Dylan was born. And some of y'all were very young.
I was
what?
I was real young.
No, you were a couple years older than I was. And for the record, I was 29. Anyway, in that paper, in that research, I discovered that John Wesley used the term that he believed the Lord's Supper was a channel of grace, even to the point that if a person approached the Lord's Supper in faith in Christ, they could be saved. Because the coming as of active faith in Christ, they could receive grace because they were coming in faith. Okay. Well, in general, again, you were supposed to read this. What's your reaction or thoughts, not about the specific means of grace, but about Wesley's whole idea of means of grace, of those things or sacraments or practices that can be channels of receiving grace from God? What's your overall just reaction to that fact?
I appreciated it. I thought it was, to me, it was like a aha explanation of understanding why things work the way they do in regard to just the Christian faith. It's just, it gives opportunities where it said at the second paragraph, the means of grace are the ways in which we open ourselves to experience God's love and grace in our lives. Too often we do activities such as reading our Bibles or praying. Because we do them, we prove to God our willingness to obey, or worse yet, is a work by which we earn God's favor. Just this concept of means of grace is just ways that God can speak to us, and it's nothing that we can do or earn on our own.
It's just putting ourselves in a place where there's that intentionality of being available, or practice that will tend to open ourselves to God. Any other ideas of what's your overall reaction to the whole idea of there being these means of grace of getting from God what he wants to give us?
I think that paragraph, the one that Bethany just read about the general means of grace, is something that I'm going to preach. I'm going to take that paragraph and literally preach that, because there's some people in our church that need to hear that, because I don't think they understand it.
Okay.
And I'm talking some tenured Christians.
Yeah, I understand. Sure. Well, the truth is we have a lot of well-meaning, authentic followers of Christ who are severely uninformed.
Amen.
Yes. Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, it's the preachers and the teachings and the deliberate discipleship's fault. And the other side of it is, it's some of their faults for not availing themselves of the opportunities that have been presented to them. But either way, they don't know. That's the best way to say it. It's not rebellion. They just don't know. Yeah, Mike?
How do you, biblical illiteracy is increasing at like a rocket. So is that the discipleship director's responsibility, or is that my individual responsibility?
Can I jump in on that? Because I'm facing that. The younger crowd at our church, it is like pulling teeth to get them to read their Bible. And in conversations with them, I'll just ask them things, and we're talking, and they're very, a matter of fact, I don't have time to do that. I can preach till I'm blue in the face. There is some action required on the part of the congregant. Prevenient grace at work, everything at work, they've got to want to. They have to want that change in their heart.
Here's the way I look at it. Of course, the preacher, the discipleship pastor, we have responsibility to offer opportunities to preach and teach and all that. Of course, as a follower, if I'm a follower of Jesus, I have a responsibility. Here's where the problem comes. Like you said, Jim, it's the desire. Back in the horse and buggy days, when Mike and I would go to the dorm to pick up either Esther or me, Martha, nobody ever had to make me go see her. Nobody ever said, you haven't seen her in a while. You need to go over and go with her. Nobody had to make me want to be around her. I just wanted to suck the same air. Some of y'all remember those days. Yes. When the heart is where it ought to be towards our object of love, motivation, desire is no problem.
See, I back to what Jim said. I have a personal situation. I was on a trip with my youngest son, who I would define as totally biblical illiterate, even though he grew up in the Word, with the Word, and it breaks my heart. In our discussion last week, he basically said, my other son is Benji, and he says, "Well, you and Benji just have discipline, to read the Word and blah blah blah." He said, I just don't have the retention. You know how I struggled in school. I just don't have the retention, so therefore I don't read. But yet, since December the 4th, he's become an expert in cryptocurrency. He reads all day long. He retains everything he's read. And, when I walk into their house for a meal, I feel like I'm out of place to ask if we can bless the food and and me bless the family. It's gone haywire.
Yeah. All of what we talk about of struggles for people to grow, of people availing themselves of discipleship opportunities, of willingness to serve, it goes back to, have they really come to know Jesus Christ, and has there been that transformation in their life of becoming his follower? We are substituting shallow believism. Please forgive me. I've got my card. I'm going to heaven. And Sunday morning entertainment and hype for an authentic walk with God.
Boy, you are so. My other son, Benji, I was sharing with him about this Wesley study. This is what he said. He said, "Dad, if John Wesley and some other of those theologians walked into our church or in my group of friends, he would question whether we're saved."
Oh, I'm sure he would. Sure he would. Okay, let's go on. Okay, Leclerc, y'all can read that. The general means of grace are the commandments: denying yourself, taking up your cross. The instituted or particular, excuse me, means of grace is prayer, searching the scripture, the Lord's Supper, and Christian conference or Christian conversation. Is the idea of the Lord's Supper a new being a means of grace? Would that be new to your people, the people you deal with? little kids, I'm sure that, I don't know. But do you think that would be a new idea? Because in most of our churches, I think it's a memorial. We go in and we have a memorial and, we remember. But do you think people understand that coming to the Lord's Supper can be a means of God distributing grace to them?
I think it was new before I got there, because when I came in talking about it being a means of grace and the difference between serving it as the Eucharist and serving it as communion, being vastly different. The imagery of a Eucharist is the Catholic view, and saying we're not doing this memorial, but we're doing this in a more of an experiential moment where God reaches from the supernatural and touches the natural, and something miracle happens, which is a means of grace. So I think when I first got there, it was very memorial. Well, heck, when I got there, Bill Rowe wasn't doing communion at all. They weren't doing it for once a year maybe. So yeah, it was reinstituting.
Yeah. I think, let's just say this. I think it's important for our people to understand that it is. That we as Wesleyans believe that when we partake of it, and we'll talk about it more in a minute, when we partake of the Lord's Supper, that it is an opportunity through faith for God to literally distribute to us or channel to us his grace, to encourage us, to challenge us, to speak to us, or whatever. I think, of course, it rests on the ones who's officiating to do that. There are times I wish I had done a better job of that. Okay, let's look at infant baptism. How many of you did not know the Church of the Nazarene believed in infant baptism? Come on, confess.
Me?
You said how many knew or how many didn't know?
Didn't know.
Oh, I knew. Me and James Lunsford went rounds about it.
You and who?
Me and James Lunsford. James Lunsford, and Jonathan Leonard went rounds about that, because I was like, because of the concept of that baptism being enough. Like if they get older and want to be baptized, then they're like, you don't need it. You were already baptized, so it doesn't mean anything. And so we had that conversation, and it was really a good debate, really, but it was a good conversation.
Well, yeah. Well, typically, like I think Amy said earlier, one baptism's enough, but I'm not going to fight somebody about it.
I heard Carla Sundberg's daughter, Kara Shoneman. She came and spoke. She did revival, spiritual renewal at our church. And on Saturday, she made a really interesting comment about infant baptism that has kind of just stuck with me, and I'm chewing on. And I like the concept if parents are ready for it. She said that she and her husband chose to do infant baptism for their children instead of dedication. And then she is intentionally discipling her children. And every night she asks them the question, did you live into your baptism today? And so giving them those opportunities to understand that they've been baptized, and now how do I live into that baptism that they've experienced as a baby? And that thought's just kind of stuck with me. And as I'm learning how to minister to children and families, and if I have parents that choose to do infant baptism, that is a question that I'm going to encourage them to speak into the lives of their children. This is the choice you're making. Help them to live into that baptism.
Yeah. Well, it is a choice that the Church of the Nazarene does leave up to the parents. I think it's important that we understand the difference between what a dedication is, and that's in our reading here. I'm not going to recite it to you, but basically the dedication is an act by the parents to commit to raise their kid in the faith of the church. And we ask the church in that ritual if they will do what they can to do the same thing. Dr. LeKirk here underscores that when we baptize children, first we proclaim together our common belief in the reality of God's prevenient grace. It focuses on God's commitment to the child. God is committed to the child. It's grace that makes the infant a part of the body of Christ, because the kid has not come to the age of accountability and is not held responsible. And the church has long said that, not just our church, but other churches has long said that prior to that, God will distribute his grace to a child to be his. The parents are making a commitment before the people of God to do everything in their power to guide and nurture their child, which is part of what they do in dedication, but it's not a baptism. That's why in dedication, you should not use water in a dedication service. Baptism is a sign of the new covenant. It's a sign of God's promise, even to the child. We believe that God owns the child as his own. Like Jacoby said, we could, probably the best theology, if we really want to be best theology, is you don't follow up infant baptism with believer baptism, because they've already been baptized into the church. However, I'm not, and there'd be guys who would disagree with me, but I'm not going to tell somebody that wants to be baptized as an adult, if they were baptized as an infant and they say, I want to have this meaningful opportunity, blah, 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 I may tell them, okay, it's a way to testify to your faith or to reaffirm your faith that you received, and I'd probably go ahead and do it. But I'm not. There are things theologically that we can be at war about that in the life of a person really don't make a whole lot of difference, and don't alienate somebody over a non-essential issue. We have enough essential things that we shouldn't be violating. That don't make this one of them. Under believer baptism on 12:5, which of those 5 things of Dr. Staples, who was a seminary professor, I did not have him, but I knew who he was, great Wesleyan scholar, he's with Jesus now, about the understanding of adult baptism, which one of those 5 things would be new to you in your understanding of baptism?
Well, I guess it's not new, but it's definitely something that language is something different, which is bearing the mark of Christ, is to wear the mark of Christ's purity. That language means so much now that I'm not used to it. It kind of hit me strange. Yeah, I think the purity issue, Jacoby, has to do with the pure heart that's totally given over to God. No rivalries, no rival loves, no divided love. That would be the purity aspect. And I think the fact of being baptized is us making that statement, so to speak. Anything else want to stand out to you?
The receiving the Spirit of Christ, I've never heard in a baptism I've never heard that said as part of the baptism.
Yeah, neither, and I don't think I have either, Mike.
Buried in Christ, the resurrection. In fact, I don't recall ever hearing any of this, except the whole thing: we die to Christ, you go into the water, you come up, blah, blah, blah.
I think the Spirit thing there, I think the critical part of that receiving the Spirit of Christ really is not about receiving the Holy Spirit. I think it's that last sentence, it's a symbol of our life in Christ. So it's a symbolic thing of the Spirit's presence. Even as Christ was baptized and the Spirit descended on him, I don't think it's a literal, the Spirit descends on us, so to speak. because if we're a believer, we already have received the Spirit. But it's a symbolic identification with his baptism and the Spirit's presence there. But back to what you said, I've never, as long as I've been in the church, I've never used that or heard that. And again, this is interpretations of Wesley, okay? And we are Wesleyan, but not everybody, well, quite frankly, a lot of people who are Wesleyan preachers are not very good Wesleyans because they have not read it enough to know where he stood on things. Okay, Jacoby, yeah, go ahead.
When they said bearing the mark of Christ, can we still relate it with the fruit of the Spirit?
I don't know that, Sephora. My first inclination is I don't know that would be part of the fruit of the Spirit or identified as fruit of the Spirit, because it's really pointing to Christ's purity more than the activity of the Spirit. But that might take a little more research for me to give you a better answer. Okay. Over here on the next page about the Eucharist or Lord's Supper, the term Eucharist goes to a Greek word meaning thanksgiving. Okay, so it's that element of the thanksgiving involved in that. Y'all can do your own research of the difference in the terminology. In the Church of the Nazarene, we have typically used the term communion or Lord's Supper. More and more, like Jacoby indicated, more and more guys, ladies, are using the term Eucharist, and they do so for very good reasons. But I would, rather than us get into that now, I would encourage you to look up, try to distinguish the difference. And I mean, the supper's the same, but some of the emphasis and all is a little different. Let me run through this and just highlight the differences of what's the theory of what happens in the Lord's Supper. Number one, Wesley had a very high estimation of it. I mean, it was extremely important to him. He would have a heart attack if there was a church that said they were Wesleyan in their theology and had the Lord's Supper once a year. I mean, he would just go crazy, I think. Transubstantiation is the position of the Catholic Church. They believe that when the priest says the prayer of consecration, that the elements actually become the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ. That they are transformed into the literal body and blood of Jesus. And they use the terminology, Christ is crucified anew. The consubstantiation with, you see trans meaning it changes. Consubstantiation was the position of Martin Luther, who believed that the elements remained the elements, but the literal body and blood of Christ were present with the elements. John Calvin was into spiritual presence. He didn't believe there was any change, but that Christ truly comes into the bread and wine in a spiritual sense. So they don't change into Christ, but he is present in them spiritually. Zwingli, another of the reformers, was a memorialist. No changes takes place. It's just affirming that it's a memorial to the death of Christ, and it's a remembrance of his self-sacrifice. I think probably most of the people in most of our churches, that's what they think about it, unless they've been educated differently. That it's a memorial. We're remembering the death of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice. Wesley took a position probably in between the two of Calvin and Zwingli. Again, John Wesley's in the middle position. He believed that Christ was present there, but he also believed that it was presence of the whole Trinity. It was not just Christ present as we take of communion, that the Trinity is present. And that, of course, it was a means of grace. Any thoughts on any of that, you guys, ladies?
Well, Alan, what was your, when you served communion, what was your, where were you on all this?
Well, I had come to understand by the time I got to Gallatin that Wesley's, I would make the statement that Christ is present with us as we come to his table. And I would also make the point of the fact that it is a way for God to channel or deliver, it's a means of grace, that the Church of the Nazarene believes that. That's about the extent of what I would say. Mainly emphasizing the presence of Christ. And I would even say these elements are just elements. They do not become anything other than bread and grape juice. And they do not change into anything, but Christ is present with us here.
See, as a lay minister, I can't do communion or baptism.
Yeah. That's for ordained people, or a licensed pastor like Jacob, his church. Since he's a licensed pastor of a church, he can officiate communion and baptism. This little Methodist church I'm serving in, you see, in the Methodist church, you have to be a seminary graduate to be ordained. You can be a licensed minister and pastor churches if you take certain courses like you guys are taking, but you cannot be ordained unless you have a seminary degree. And in the Baptist church, there's a licensed pastor there, retired where I am, but he could not officiate communion. The district superintendent allows me as an ordained Nazarene to officiate the communion, but only under certain circumstances would he be allowed to officiate communion. And, I understand that, but on the other side, I don't know,
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I wonder if God cares. And I always ask myself that question when I'm confronted with those situations. And like during COVID, Bill Road is a BYOE space, bring your own elements because you're doing it at home. And we've spent the whole time of COVID empowering our people to serve their families' communions and friends' communion because they're at home. And then I had some manual toting Nazarene come to me and tell me that they are ill-equipped to do the elements. And I go, does God care in this extent that these people are now a part of enriching their spiritual lives of their families that they've never been before?
I think were you leading the communion to people at home?
I was leading it, yes, over via internet, yes.
Okay, then they don't really have a leg to stand on, because even in the local church, when you officiate, you have lay people serve it. I mean, they can distribute the elements.
See, man, let me tell you, I feel like people watch our services sometimes just to complain.
They do. Here's the thing, Jacoby. It's one of those things that in most religious organizations, we have rules and stipulations that we agree to do because we're a part of the team. Okay, we should do that. But in the end, there are some things we do that probably God doesn't care.
I love how you said that. That's like the most realistic response you could have given right there.
Well, I have my moments. Not very often, but I have them. Just for the record, John Wesley partook of communion at least weekly, and sometimes more often than weekly. Now you will hear criticism from people that don't know better to say, well, if you do it too often, it loses its meaning. Well, I guess that means we should only pray once a year. Or maybe once a year, tell your spouse you love them. No, the fact
that thought negates what he did at Calvary for us. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. What we're really doing, the thought is, if it's a means of grace, that's a plus to do it more often. The other thing is we're showing the importance of it by doing it regularly. We're underscoring with what Wesley would say. Excuse me. Look on, and we'll take a break after this. The page 12:7. Dr. Staples there at the bottom where the bullet points are, or towards the middle. Examining the means of it as a symbol. The Eucharist is a symbol of thanksgiving to the Father, commemoration of Christ, self-sacrifice or consecration, fellowship and unity of the faithful, the promise of the coming kingdom. I just got to thinking, and the next time I do communion at the little Methodist church, I'm going to include this before I serve it. I'm going to go through that these are symbols of what we're doing.
Hey, Alan, where is that? Where are you
That's
reading?
on page 12:7, Mike, under lesson 12. It's bullet points, about 2/3 of the way down.
Oh, there you go. Thanksgiving to the Father and.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would encourage you guys, as you're doing it, to maybe incorporate some of this and some of the other things we just looked at, to where I think maybe communion could begin to have a more special effect. I noticed at the little Methodist church, we read a ritual every time. I mean, we read the ritual. It's like 2 pages long, and the response by the congregation and all that. But I think if I was specific in sharing some of these things we looked at here of what it's all about, it might carry more meaning for them.
Hey, can I ask a quick question before I break?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm the guy today. I'm sorry, late, everybody. So one time at our church, we had communion, and the person supposed to buy juice bought the wrong type of juice. Someone said that it's against our piety to serve any other type of juice but grape juice. Is that real? I've never read that.
What kind of juice did they serve?
I think it was like a cocktail juice with like cranberry and grape.
I don't know that I've ever read it anywhere, but again, it's somebody making an issue over something they didn't need to make.
Yeah, I was like, do you want me to tap my vein and give real blood, or is this going to be okay for the day?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always use grape juice, and I would ask them to serve grape juice the next time, but don't get your nose bent out of shape, because God probably understands. Okay, let's take 10 minutes. Then we'll come back and look at Mildred.
I'm gonna sign back in on my computer.
Okie doke, dude. Sephora?
Yes.
Excuse me. We didn't get a chance because you were, in flight or whatever. How many, do you have children?
Yes, 2.
And how old are they?
16 and 14.
16 and 14.
Yes.
And you go to First Church's Haitian church?
Yes, the Haitian congregation.
And what does your husband do?
He's a pressman.
He's a pressman, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good. I like to know things about you guys.
Yes.
Okay, talk to you in a minute.
All right, no problem.
Well, I'm glad you said what you said about baptism. I'll talk to you after the class if you got a minute.
That'd be fine, Jim.
Okay.
No, it's not it. It's not it, Dr. Alan?
Yeah.
All right, let's say that I complete the certification, which I have board approval, so I become a bivocational pastor. But I can't baptize. So what happens when someone comes up and says, I'd really like to be baptized? What do I do?
Well, I'm not very familiar with that certificate, Mike, that you're getting. Does it qualify you to pastor a church if Dwight appoints you to it, to be a lay pastor?
Yes.
Okay. I won't say I think, because I don't know enough about it to think. I wonder if there's circumstances under which, because he's appointed you as the pastor, he can allow you to officiate at that.
Yeah, it's and when Pastor Kevin introduced, I mean, he literally handed out the definition from the manual about this whole thing of lay ministry, because everybody's unaware.
Mm-hmm.
And he emphasized to the board, we have to encourage and pray for more people to go in this direction. But it's like uncharted waters almost.
Yeah, I think there are only 2 or 3 guys on the whole district that have it. I'm on that board with Kevin that recommends to the district who gets licensed and stuff. And I believe there were 2 this year that were doing the lay, that historically have done the lay minister certificate.
So does that committee you just mentioned appoint bivocational pastors, or does Dwight do it? How does it work?
Dwight, our committee does. We have subcommittees that interview people, and the subcommittees will recommend to the executive committee the action that they've taken, and we approve it.
Okay.
And then that goes to the district assembly. Like Jacoby was approved. Then there's an ordination committee, or 2 of them there are 2, and they interview them, and then they recommended, over my objection, that Jacoby be ordained. Over my objection.
Why was there an objection? I just heard that. I was like, wait a minute, he can say objection?
I thought that'd wake you up. Of course I didn't object.
I was like processing my brain, like, did he say objection?
I knew it'd wake you up. No, then they bring it to and say, the subcommittee or the ordination committee recommends that Jacoby be recommended to the district to the assembly and to the general superintendent for ordination. And we vote yes. And so now it goes to the district assembly. District assembly technically has to approve it. The DS, the general has to approve it. And then during the assembly, if he behaves himself, he'll be ordained. But as far as appointments of pastors and all that, that comes totally under Dwight's immediate purview. Now, I don't know, I guess he could technically ask a mission area director to make an appointment, because I know some of the missionary directors are getting people to fill pulpits. So if a pastor is going to be absent or there's an interim, say Darren on his mission area, I think now before Sexton would appoint those preachers to fill in, but I think because they have so much of it, they let the mission area directors make those interim appointments. But your appointment, Mike, to a church would definitely be through Dwight, I would think.
Yeah, I think so.
Or yeah, Sexton may notify you, but Dwight has to technically say okay.
Dwight's wife Karen babysat our children.
Hey, are you on the committee that approves people who are trying to get the designation of evangelist?
Yeah, it's that whole. Yeah, the same committee does all the licensing.
What's that designation of evangelist?
Go ahead, Jacoby.
So basically, your name gets put in a database, and you got to get approved by the executive committee, and it's an every year thing. There's certain criteria you have to meet, and so when like districts are doing like camps or things of that nature, they go to that list some of the times and pick people from that list. And it is something that I'm already doing in general. So I just put my name in the hat and said,
Yeah,
I'm already doing the work of evangelist. You know, I travel at least 20 weeks a year.
right.
And the designation, there's only one black person on that committee right now, and she's a Caribbean. And so I figured I'd put my name in there just because.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I'm interested in that too.
Yeah, typically, Jonathan, it doesn't go to guys that are lead pastors in a church.
Right.
It typically goes to somebody who feels like they're specifically called to go out and speak as an evangelist. And there are 2 or 3 different designations. One is, I forget what it is. One is registered. Then there's one that's a commissioned evangelist, and one is a tenured evangelist.
Oh,
And that those all have to do with how many meetings you hold a year, how long you have been a commissioned evangelist,
right.
before you can become a tenured one. But that does come through the district executive committee, and the first step for you in that would be to talk to Jeff Sexton at the district office.
Yeah.
And ask Jeff what would be the things that you would need to do to do that. It doesn't change your ordination requirements or anything like that.
Okay.
It's just a different designation. As opposed to being a lead pastor, you're registered as an evangelist with the Church of the Nazarene.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan, how'd last night go?
Oh man, it was amazing, man. It was a good time. Those kids, they're hungry for the Lord, and they really didn't even know it. You know, like they go to a Christian school, but I don't know the whole story behind everything. But you know, I think they've come from kind of a rough environment, and man, it was great.
This was Lighthouse?
Prayer time. Yeah, Lighthouse Christian School. I was down there by you last night, Jacoby, off Smith Springs Road at the YMCA camp.
Hey man, Antioch welcomes you, man. We're a holier place because you were here. Thank you.
Oh, I don't know about that. That's my stomping grounds. I grew up off Anderson Road. So that's where I'm from. But it was great. I love hearing those kids worship the Lord and stuff. But we had a really good prayer time afterwards, and I gave my testimony, and it was really good. I really hope to be able to I think after last night and the other week, I'm going to be able to speak there on not a real like consistent, but more, every couple months, I think I'll be able to speak. So I hope that's the case anyway. So it was a blessing.
Okay, gentlemen, let's go ahead and start and let the ladies jump in when they get there. Mike, why don't you bring up what you were wanting to mention about Wine Coop, about in Christ? What chapter was that in?
Hang on a second. I should have made a note.
Well, if not, go ahead and tell us what you were referring to. You don't have to pull it out if you can't find it.
Well, it's my favorite topic to teach on. In fact, back in the 2000s, literally the Holy Spirit woke me up in the middle of the night, and it was like, get a pen, I'm giving you something. And I'd been studying Romans 8. So I have an acrostic. Christ has eliminated my guilt, which comes from, therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And Paul uses in Christ all throughout his letters. But nobody, when I ask, nobody understands it, and I mean, it's just my pet. I guess it's what I perceive as the heart of the lack of victorious living, is we don't understand our position in Christ. We understand that the Spirit of God, the Spirit of Jesus lives in us, but we have no concept of what it means to be in Him. So I think it's in chapter 15. I'll find it.
Okay, we'll be over there in a minute. Okay, let's start with, if we have time, another week, we'll double back on maybe a little bit that was in those that we skipped last week. But otherwise, we may not cover them. In the first few pages, let's just say the first 4 or 5 pages of Christian perfection, chapter on Christian perfection, was there anything in that particularly stood out to you, that you underscored or have a question about, that you found particularly significant?
On 274, I mean, this is back to in the second paragraph, some equate sanctification wholly with the crisis perfection syndrome.
And?
No, I mean, this class has just opened my eyes so brightly and revealed so much about the erroneous theology that I've heard as an adolescent and even at Trevecca.
Mike, I would recommend that you definitely get Dr. Greathouse's book, Holiness in Christ.
Okay, what's it called?
Holiness, WHOLENESS.
Okay, great.
It's to be quite honest with you, I'm wrestling with the next time I teach this class if I use that book instead of Wine Coop, because it's not quite as long and it's a little easier to understand.
I would go with that, easier to understand. Some of this just absolutely goes over my head.
Well, and the truth is, some of it I'm going, what'd she say?
Yeah.
But so much of what she says was so groundbreaking when she said it, that there were people that called her a heretic.
Yeah.
In the denomination.
Yeah.
Because she was not going the line of what they thought Wesley said, because they had been so much influenced by the American Holiness movement.
Right.
Fact of the matter is, when I wrote my paper on John Wesley at Olivet, and the committee reviewed it, the chairman of the religion department at Olivet. Now his background was his doctorate was in Christian education. It wasn't in theology. One of the statements that I made in there about Wesley and the channel of grace, he said it's not true. He said that's
Wow.
not so. My main professor told him, said, "Oh yes, it is." But here he was chairman of the religion department at Olivet. He did not realize Wesley's position on the Lord's Supper. So you can imagine when Wynkoop wrote this in the early 70s, I guess, it was an earthquake.
Yeah. And then, well, Greatheart started the movement.
Yeah.
And then comes Wynkoop and then Dunning.
Well, and actually John Knight too had, but it was
Yeah.
John Knight early on was writing some of this, but Greathouse was, like you said, really kicked it off. In fact, the matter is, there were some of our schools that didn't have much confidence in Trevecca's religion department. One in particular, I won't say which, because they were so thorough on American holiness. Phoebe Palmer and all that stuff, the rigidity of how you're sanctified and name it and claim it, that they didn't like this at all. But thankfully, most of our, I think by now, most of our religion departments are more in line with Wesley. Okay, one thing I want to underscore for you guys that I think is very critical to understand is on page 275, the second paragraph, next to the last sentence, where it says Wesley concludes. Wesley concludes. Have you found it?
Yeah.
Page 275, middle of the page, second paragraph, towards the last part. Wesley concludes that renewal to the lost image of God, meaning love to God and man, expressed as Christ-likeness, sums up Wesley's definition of Christian perfection. Circle that, underline it, highlight it, teach it. If you want to know what Christian perfection is, that's it. I have often preached when I'm talking about holiness, I've said, if you want to know what holiness is, it's Christ-likeness. And most people can wrap their head around that.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else in those few pages, 274 and following, anybody want to underscore or mention? Questions?
Yeah, on 276.
Okay.
Second paragraph, halfway down. Scripture perfection is pure love filling the heart and governing all the words and actions. If your idea includes anything more, anything else, it's not scriptural.
I highlighted that first sentence that you read too, Mike.
What was the sentence? I missed it.
Share it again with him.
It's in the second paragraph. Scripture perfection is pure love filling the heart and governing all the words and actions.
Sounds like Christ-like to me.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else in the following pages there anybody wants to mention or question? Okay, let's go over to page 285. 2 or 3 sections there I want you to highlight or make a special note of. I think Dr. Weinkoop is making a swipe at some of our hyper Pentecostal friends here, particularly some of the televangelists. The first paragraph on page 285 that starts with extreme emphasis on healing and freedom from economic need when in grace, meaning if you've just got enough faith and you're serving God, is perfectionism. In other words, it's really not a whole lot to do with God.
It's fundraising.
Yeah, for my new jet.
Did you know, I just found out today, you know, we got the National Black Conference coming up in Tampa.
And I did not get my invitation.
You didn't get an invitation? You're
It's going
invited.
on record.
You are more than
It's going
invited.
on record. Who's being left out here now?
Not you. I invited you.
You did not.
Right now. I'm inviting you right now. It's
Okay,
in
what were you
July.
gonna say, buddy?
So the website got up, and do you know that they're calling the National Black Conference the Pentecostal side of the Nazarene Church? And I go, what? What? This is from the office in Kansas or wherever it is that that we're the Black Conference is the Pentecostal expression of Nazarenedom. Like we're this like outlandish, this outlier section of the Nazarene
Who
Church.
said that?
It was in the description of it that was done through, because the National Black Conference is now one of the biggest events our denomination does. It's like PalCon, something, missions, something, National Black Conference. It's that big now. And so everything's run through that office. Everything's run through like it does for everything else. And so their first rendition of that slated the National Black Conference as a peek into the Pentecostal side of the Nazarene Church. And I was like, that's nuts that we're like sectioned off that way. So when you said that, it was funny because that's how they kind of describe us.
I'd sure be interested in who said that. I mean, whose office let that out? That
Let me find out which one it was.
I'd like to know. That's
Yeah,
I
that
tell
don't
you
even
what,
sound
I bet by the time a few of the general superintendents sees that, somebody's going to hear about it.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said, I believe some of the general superintendents might have something to say about that.
Facts. Yeah. It's been changed since, but I saw that first rendition. I go, what does this mean?
Yeah. Well, maybe it was intended to be a compliment. Okay, look on page 286. Another quote I want y'all to underscore. The first full paragraph, the second sentence, Christian action. You got it? Christian perfection or perfect love stands for a full measure of personal obligation to the whole will of God, rather than an acceptance of Christian status without a commensurate responsibility attached. It stands for obedience from the heart rather than an abrogation of law. And here's another important part. It requires the highest moral integrity and rational responsibility. So in other words, it acts, it plays out. It's something that works in life. Okay, anything in this area of biblical survey of perfection, some of the Greek there? I'm not going to go over it, but on page 288, I want you to, starting it right there below the indented quote, says Jesus used this word for perfect, teleos. Those next 3 paragraphs, I want you to highlight that and go back and reread it and make sure you understand it.
The one that starts with Jesus used this word for perfect.
Yeah. Talks about being perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. It puts it in perfect context, and helps you understand some of the tense there that's intended, because we can't literally be perfect like our Father is in heaven, but it gives a good explanation of what that passage is really saying.
But it comes after love your enemies.
Yes. That's one of the key points that Winecoop makes, Mike, is that context.
It's on 287.
288, the bottom 2 paragraphs, and the top paragraph on the next page.
Oh, okay.
You'll probably preach that sometime, Jonathan.
Without a doubt.
Anybody got anything in there they want to mention or question? I think if I was going to encourage you guys to reread any chapter in this book, if you want to get a good grip of it, read this one. Okay, I've highlighted a lot of them, but I'm not going to take your time with them. Some of it's a little repetitious.
On 291, in all these occasions, this whole paragraph about babyhood was interesting.
Well, what was particularly interesting to you, Mike?
Well, just that's where a lot of our people are.
Okay.
It's like Paul saying, you still want milk. In fact, she says it's a child who refuses to grow up, who hides behind his mother's skirts, who pulls on the milk bottle when he should be eating solid food.
Yeah.
Yeah. I listened to a pastor who refers to it as thumb-sucking Christians. It's kind of harsh.
Oh, I bet. I understand that one.
Yeah, man, it's real.
Trying to decide which of these things I've highlighted I want to bother you guys with.
On top of 293, first paragraph is basically my life verse, Philippians 3:10.
Yeah, and that next sentence after that, it's not simply endless existence that is the Christian emphasis, but being conformed to Christ's death and to attain the resurrection through him. Okay, look on page 301, item number 10.
Which page?
301.
301?
Yeah. Number 10. The most important single characteristic of the biblical meaning of perfection is its positive nature. Perfection is not principally the absence of all that is less than perfect, but the presence of love with all the dynamic meaning of love. So the emphasis is not on what we don't have that doesn't measure up to perfection, but it's the positive aspect that it's that presence of love that's going to result in all that that means.
Yeah, I feel like when we talk about Christian perfection, and I'm reading this, it kind of presents this when it talks about love and Christian perfection, more of a duty than anything else. Like it's an obligatory thing. Like if you have Christian perfection, then you will love. Like that's your first instinct is to show love. And where I find when teaching this, the hardest part is to explain to people that it's not the emotional, I agree with you, affirming love, but it is like a love that is also correcting, a love that shows, general care for one's soul. And I like the way they described it because it does sound like more of a duty than anything else in these things.
I think if we properly understood it, though, I think if we properly understood Wesley would not say it's, he would say there's an obligation to act it out, but I think he would say it first comes from the reality of what's present in you. In other words, that you will do that. It's kind of like the way you respond to your daughters. You don't do love for them because it's your duty, although it is. You do it because you genuinely love those three little girls. And I think that's what Wesley would say, that when we are in possessions of the kind of love that God wants us to have, I mean, due to our relationship with him, we will desire, it will just come out of us. It'll be who we are. I think might be a little better understanding of it. Okay, let's look over at for a few minutes at sanctification as the substance of it.
And one other comment on 303.
Yeah,
on
Mike.
303 is the word saints.
Okay.
In the process of being saint. I mean, to the rowdy church at Corinth, Paul said to the saints at Corinth. And that's another in Christ subject that I talk about. And I came home and told my wife to call me Saint Mike. And that didn't go over very well.
I'm sure Esther just jumped all over that. I think Martha would throw up. I think now that you mentioned saint, I think it's important, and I can't remember where, it's somewhere in Wine Coop, that saint was not a status thing.
Right.
Anyone who, as Mike said, was in Christ, anyone who had come to faith in Christ in the New Testament was referred to as a saint. The saints in Ephesus, the saints in Corinth, blah, 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 blah. So it was not a special achievement because you'd known Jesus a long time or because you didn't wear long hair or whatever. It purely had to do with the fact that you had a relationship with Jesus. Made you were identified as a saint. Okay. Anything else in Christian perfection anybody wants to underscore?
Number 4.
What's that, Sephora?
Number 4.
On what page?
307.
307?
Yes.
Okay, what have you got? Number 4.
You said the final step in the abstracting process is to lift sanctification completely.
Away from justification, in fact, as well as in thought, so that the great debate becomes who is a Christian? I think he's talking about a problem there.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, people are trying to make it less than something else. Talking about reductionism in terminology. It's how we can reduce the meaning of it by the terms we use.
Okay.
Well, this speaks to that. Go to the next page, on page 308 of the first indented paragraph where it says when. Page 308. When the interrelatedness of justification and sanctification is severed or separated, and justification is slipped under sanctification as a sort of poor basement apartment under the luxurious upper floor living quarters, or it is made to mark the difference between first and second class citizens, something essential is lost from the meaning of both of these terms. So in other words, when people's terminology, they make justification less than it is in order to elevate sanctification or entire sanctification, they're doing a disservice to both. And I'm sure maybe Mike and I are the only ones that have seen this, but I know I did growing up, because if somebody could testify to being entirely sanctified, they were a step above somebody who said they were just saved.
Yeah.
And John Wesley would go crazy, because he would say sanctification comes under the, as we said earlier, under the salvation thing. So you know it's kind of crazy to make an elitist thing out of something that's never intended to be that. It's not that you're a special status person. It's just that God has done something additional in your life that, you know, and it's not because of you. And so he'd go crazy about that. Look at the next page, 309, the second paragraph, right smack in the middle of that paragraph when it says in Wesleyanism. This is important because we've talked about this imputed and imparted thing. Right in the middle, second paragraph. In Wesleyanism, sanctification is both an imputation and an impartation. It has in it elements of crisis and process. It is both a separation and a uniting, a cleansing and a discipleship. That's a very insightful statement she's made there. Let's see. Anybody got anything else in this chapter so far that you want to point out?
Hang on, this is my.
I've got tons of it underlined, but y'all are able to read.
Alan, two paragraphs up from where you were, just above where it says sanctification, the substance.
What page are we on?
Well, it was on your 309, which is my 306.
Okay.
where you just read in Wesleyanism, sanctification is both imputation and
Okay,
impartation.
so what have you got to point out, Jim?
So go up, it says love and holiness are not merely related or concomitant. They are two sides of one thing. The holiness message then, vitalized by the word of God, is clothed once more with the power of the Spirit. It is God's word, not merely the words of men. It is love, fellowship, joy, peace, power, service, discipleship, life, and all the rest of what is involved in the grace of God.
Why did that stand out to you, Jim?
It's powerful. I mean, it talking that just that phrase where it said there are two sides of one thing, meaning love. What love is really about.
Okay, and what holiness is.
Yeah.
Holiness and love are not interchangeable terms. But they're very much related. It's like you for Wesley, there's no holiness apart from love, and there's not going to be any love apart from holiness. Thanks for pointing that out, Jim.
Hey, I'm sorry, I lost my internet connection. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, turn over to page 314. For your sake, Jim, the heading is You in Christ and Christ in You. 3 or 4 or 5 pages over from where you were. You in Christ and Christ in You is the heading.
Yeah, this is where I loved it.
Yeah, I knew you would. That first paragraph under that, those who are in Christ and those who are not, the distinction is not who are not is the Christian's distinctive characteristic that he is indwelt by the Holy Spirit, sometimes expressed as Christ dwelling in the heart. This is not a distinction between the believer and the sanctified. No such distinct difference is intended in biblical expression. So to say Christ is dwelling in us is not just something that has what to do with the sanctified. It's both. It's not, there's no difference. A couple other things I want to point out to you, and then I'll let you go. Turn over to, this is just an area I want you to just, that I think is very important for you to get a hold of. And the heading is Sanctification in the New Testament, Jim. Several pages over from where we just read.
What page is it?
It's page, what I'm looking at is page 320. It's a couple of pages over from that heading, Jim. Sanctification in the New Testament, a couple of pages over from that.
Okay, it's 318 in my book.
Yeah, we're on page 320. Those where I want you to look.
Okay.
Okay, right down in the middle where it's got those parts in italics from well, John 17. I just am underscoring for you that last 2/3 of that page 320 and the first half of page 321 are sections that I think are very beneficial to you about the Christ's high priestly prayer. Page 320 and 321. The bottom 2/3 on 320 and the first half on 321, the A, B, C, D, E, F. This is interesting from Wine Coop on 323, item number 4. It's a couple pages over from where you are, Jim, on that. All believers in the New Testament called holy or sanctified or saints, irrespective of spiritual maturity or any other qualifications.
Yeah, I have an asterisk all over that one.
Yeah. No reference is ever made to unsanctified believers, and then it turns the page. That's the last sentence. In distinction from sanctified believers so far as the express statement of Scripture goes. Because you're initially sanctified. And we have to understand that biblically and theologically, the term sanctification is broader than entire sanctification. Because it begins in salvation. So a lot of times in the Nazarene church, we use the word sanctification, and we're thinking entire sanctification. In reality, it's the broader term of sanctification, that the thing that's going on throughout our lives till we come to the point of entire sanctification. Now, this may shake up some folk. On page 324, next page, or that page at the bottom, item number 6. And you'll want to read this, the rest of that item 6 yourself, but here's what I want to mention first. Of the 2 prayers for sanctification recorded in the New Testament, both were petitions in behalf of others and not for the one who did the praying. John 17, that's Jesus in his high priestly prayer, and 1 Thessalonians 5:23 that we love to point out. Check this out, though. Both were prayers in behalf of a corporate body. Yeah. It's been one of the proof texts of the American Holiness and people and some entire sanctification Nazarenes to say that's the proof that God's asking me as an individual to be entirely sanctified. The tense there is for the corporate body. And then 3 or 4 sentences, 2 sentences down from that, in connection with the Thessalonian church, it seems unlikely that the reference to incomplete faith, which some have used, the reason Wine Coop's doing this is some have used the passage in Thessalonians where it says, I've come to supply what is lacking in your faith. They've used that to try to prove that he's talking about these people need to be entirely sanctified. That's what Wine Coop's really addressing here. She says, in connection with the Thessalonian church, it seems unlikely that the reference to incomplete faith could mean anything other than immaturity. What's lacking in their faith is not another work of grace. It's they are immature in their faith. And y'all can benefit from reading the rest of that if you want to preach on it.
You've been to preach on it. I'm ready to listen.
I keep going, I will. You know me, I might get wound up, Jacoby.
Amen. I'm counting on it. Amen.
Get wound. Yeah.
Of course, you know, my getting wound is not like Jacoby's getting wound.
Looks like somebody better pick Jacoby up and yell Lazarus again.
I'd hate to try to pick Jacoby up now.
Facts. And by the way, man, that was such a traumatic time, man. Like I have never sat on the edge of any pew at any service at all. I'm a middle sitter now, man. Legit.
I bet you never fell asleep again, did you?
Never, ever have I fell asleep in church again.
I dozed off on the platform at Olathe College Church once.
On the platform?
On the platform. It was just one of those, you know when you do this number?
Yeah.
I was district NYI president, and I'd been up half the night at a retreat because I was afraid those in charge of the retreat wouldn't have control over it. And I was up till about 1 o'clock or 2, slept until 5 and drove back to church because Paul Cunningham wanted me in the service. Got back home about 7, church. I sat there, and that's in the day when the whole staff was lined up on the platform. You know, there were 10 of us on the staff. We're all lined up there, and I go do this number. And I thought, uh-oh, was I asleep 5 seconds or 5 minutes? That's the only time I ever did that. Okay, banana. Okay, here's 2 more things I want to do, and then I'll let you go. Turn over to page 333. It's under item number 5, Jim, under observations regarding sanctification. Page 333. Item number 5, just below, just after the italics. This is huge. These next 2 things are huge. There is no neutral, no man's land in moral experience. We are not free not to be committed. For commitment is the necessary act of moral persons. We are not free not to be committed. So in other words, there's no such animal as a Christian who is purposefully, partially committed. Now, it may be unknown, unrecognized, but to for somebody to say, well, I'm not fully committed anyway, so blah, 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 blah. Or when you get fully committed to God, no, we are as committed, according to Wesley, and I agree, a person is as committed as they know to be from day one in their faith. Entire sanctification is not about how committed I am, because I'm as committed from day one, all along the track, every day as I understand to be. Okay, and then skip down in that same big section number 5, about just above the last paragraph. Not the last paragraph, but just the last sentence before that. Talking about lordship. This lordship is not dependent on our acceptance. It is a fact which must motivate our relationship to Christ or exclude us from the kingdom. In other words, he is Lord. That's a fact. Me embracing him as Lord and accepting that, I'm a part of the kingdom. If I do not recognize that as him as Lord, ruler of me, I'm excluded from the kingdom. Any other thoughts, comments, brilliant insights? I know this last part's been a little dull and trying, but I just wanted to underscore a few things for you. Okay, homework time. Page 11.8 of the faculty guide. Okay, under homework, you there?
Yep.
Yep.
Page 11A. Write a one-page essay. How do you typically do that? How do you typically conduct a communion service? Blah, 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 blah. Right in the
How
middle.
you effectively,
How do you typically conduct or participate in a service where communion is served? What makes a good communion service?
let me get there, hang on a second.
You may need to pull it up, Mike. 11-8.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Write the one-page essay. Then you're going to do more with the same sermon. The same sermon that you wrote the introduction on, you're going to write the closing or a call for response using your own language. Again, it does not have to be just putting what Wesley said in your language. You can do that if you want to, or you can just, based on that sermon, you can write your own, how you would conclude it or call for a response using the same sermon.
So like an altar call.
If you wanted to make it an altar call, it may just be, instead of an altar call, it may just be a call to respond by a certain activity or decision, or, there are times, Jonathan, that I've many times I've just given people a charge to respond where they are, or as they're going home, give this some thought, or blah, blah, blah. So it can be any kind of call for response you want to.
Okay.
It could be an altar call if you want it to be.
Okay.
And then read resource 11.5 in your student guide. Another sermon, the duty of constant communion. We got 2 more weeks, sports fans.
What was the last one that you just said?
Well, it's on that same thing. Resource 11.5, the duty of constant communion. Read that and make your notes, highlight, and so forth. Okay, then on end of chapter, lesson 12, page 12-9, that first essay, write a 1 to 2 page essay. What do you believe about the end of the world?
What, that's 12 what?
12-9.
12-9?
Yeah.
Still in the faculty guide?
Yeah. Under assigned homework. Here's what I would recommend. I would recommend that you read lesson 13 before you write that. Now, you don't have to, but reading lesson 13 might give you more information or more accurate information. The next part about the Wesley sermon, don't do it.
What, Alan, what did you say about read 13?
It says to do an essay on what you believe about the end of the world.
Right.
My recommendation would be that you read lesson 13 before you answer that question.
Okay.
Just because it might make you more informed about or challenge what you're thinking about the end of the world.
Okay.
You don't have to quote 13 to anybody. That's just for maybe give you a better idea of how to answer that.
Good.
And then that next assignment of another Wesley sermon, blah, 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 we're not going to do that. We've gone through enough key points and all that, and we'll talk about it anyway. Then, of course, write in your journal. read lessons 13 and 14. Before we finish the course, I suggest that you skip down and read chapter 17 of Wine Coop.
I'm sorry, what? Repeat that?
I said before we finish the course in 2 weeks, read chapter 17 of Wine Coop. It's about preaching holiness.
Is that for next week or?
No, just before the class is over.
Okay.
We may not talk about it at all. We may talk about it the last night. I just want you to be, read it. Any questions about homework or anything else? Okay, guys, ladies, thanks for your kind attention and participation and brilliant insight.
Thank you for your teaching.
Thank you for your great teaching and giving me so much homework during spring break.
Yeah.
Hey, you're not in class. You don't have spring break.
I do.
Spring break
my kids
for
are
kids.
here.
Spring breaks are for kids.
Sound like a cereal commercial.
Dr. Ellen
I
Thompson
tell
does
you,
not love us.
I'm declaring prejudice.
Must be nice to be retired.
Prejudice. I have not been invited to the Black Conference thing.
I'm inviting you. I don't understand. I'm inviting you. Everyone, you all invited. I will give you guys an evite tonight.
When you have to beg for it, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is it at? Is it in Nashville?
Which one?
The one you was talking about.
The Shalom Summit is at the campgrounds. That's the end of the month, 25th and 26th. And the National Black Conference is in Tampa.
Oh, it's Tampa. Ooh.
Yeah.
The Shalom. I never heard of that. 25th and 26th. Is that on a weekend?
Yes, it's Friday and Saturday. All you gotta do is go to shalomsummit.org. And it's a district event. It's a Mid-South district event. Everyone is invited to that. It's
all kidding aside, it really is targeted for those in black congregations, though, isn't it, Jacoby?
The Shalom Summit?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, no, it's not.
No, the only reason why we're even doing it is because there's no representation in pastoral soul care for the general one, and there's no representation in the Hispanic one. And so because we're not represented in any other ones, once we got our Black pastors coordinator, which is Monroe Ballard, he was like, we deserve something that we can show everyone what it's like to have us being represented in something. And so it's really just for everyone to come. We want more non-Blacks to come than anyone so that they can see that, we are equally qualified, equally